All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the newly rebranded Good Night Everybody show, where we are talking to interesting people, and we're not going to be breaking this one very easily going forward. We have two of the most interesting people I've ever met, if not the most interesting people I've ever met. I'm very honored tonight to have our friend Bas Rutten back on the show again, and also returning for the second time, Exorcist Father Chad Ripperger. Father Bas, thank you so much for coming on.
You're very welcome. We got everything covered now. We got the physical and we got we got that covered.
Well, and co-hosting with me tonight is my good friend Douglas Ernst. Doug, thank you so much for showing up again, and I know you have some good questions for us a little later on.
Thanks for having me, man.
All right, so you know what? A lot of people probably don't know this, but Father, you and Bas are actually in real life friends. How did you two actually meet? Because I think a lot of people will be surprised when they hear that. The former UFC champion and legend of MMA and brawling in bars is actually close friends with a Catholic priest, an exorcist. So how did that kind of come about? Whatever you can tell us.
You know, I don't even remember fully, Bas. Do you remember?
Well, I think it was on a movie set, right? We were in Las Vegas.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
That's, I think, the first time. And then we went to a retreat. Well, you were speaking on the retreat of a mutual friend of ours. And that's where it started, but that's all the way, that's 2014. Yeah. 2014. And I know that Leo Severino, he gave a talk on the set about, and our friend said to me, hey, Bas, you want to join this talk? Now, if he would have said he's going to talk about God, he's going to talk about Jesus, I would have said, I'm up in my room, I'll see you in an hour, after the break. But he didn't say that. He said he knew me, and he said, you want to talk about how the world came together. And then Leo Severino started the leaf fell from the tree. It started with that, which brought me back to a memory that I had from my childhood, which I have no clue in my life why I always had that memory. And then it all started falling together. And the way he did that was boom, I was right away in. And then I met what everybody called the SEAL Team 6 member of the priest. And there we had Father. So and that's how we started all getting connected.
Father, did you ever imagine in your wildest dreams that you would be fairly close friends with someone like this? And I don't mean that in a disparaging way, Bas, but Bas, I'm sure you know, Father, used to be a bit of a loose cannon. He was a bit of a wild boy.
Oh, I've heard his stories. I've enjoyed, I should say, his stories.
Oh, sure.
That he tells me about some of those things. But, well, as far, did I ever think I would actually be friends with it? Not necessarily, but then again, I never thought I would be an exorcist. I was an academic, so I figured that's what I would be doing. So, no, I didn't actually think of. But on the other hand, Bas is such a great guy. We've always gotten along. We hit it right off the bat, and so it's always a pleasure to be around him. I don't get to see him as much as we would like, but there it is.
Right now, since you mentioned it, Father, how does one become an exorcist? If you can briefly tell us. What is that process kind of like? Is it thrust upon you as a priest? The bishop says, you know what, you'd make a good exorcist, get in there and fight those demons? Or is it something that a priest would pursue, that they would say, well, I feel like I'm called to this particular vocation?
Well, usually the guys that pursue it are ultimately the guys that end up dropping out or end up in trouble, and they usually don't end up very good at it. It's almost always the guys that the bishops just say, hey, we have a case, I need you to take a look at it. And that's actually what happened with me. So it basically, there was a case that arose in the Archdiocese of Omaha. They asked me to look at the guy. I did, looked at him. At the time, the only reason they asked me is because it's a total case of in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? Mm-hmm. So you have this situation where I knew a little bit about it, so they asked me to take a look at it. But then once I realized that he was possessed, I suggested, why don't you get an exorcist? They couldn't find one. And so they asked me to do it, and then I got some training, and then started doing it. So it's almost always that the bishop will ask. Those are usually the guys that go the distance and end up the best.
Did you have any preconceived notions about what it would be like to be an exorcist, and do you find that the actual experience differs from that, or is it pretty much what you expected going in?
I think the two things that I think are different from what I expected. Most of it was the same, because I had actually, when I wrote my book, The Introduction to Science of Mental Health, there's a chapter on diabolic influence. So I had studied a lot of the literature, so I kind of knew, historical literature. So I kind of knew what it was going to be like, as far as what demons did and all that type of thing. There were two things I hadn't expected, but then afterwards I was talking to exorcists. The first is the intensity of how real the other side becomes when demons are manifesting and talking about things in such clarity. That's the thing that kind of surprised me is, and then the second thing is, I did not expect to actually have to get my act together spiritually to the degree that I've been working on, because I mean, I always knew that exorcists, had to kind of do a little bit of extra work in their spiritual life, but there's not a single area of your life they won't probe if you don't get it under control. And so the amount of discipline interiorly it took kind of surprised me. But then again, something that Bas would probably understand, you get into the octagon or you get into the ring, you better be disciplined or you're going to get taken to the woodshed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You even said that if you will pronounce a word in Latin wrong, they will make fun of you, right? The demons.
Yeah, they'll. Oh, well, I had this one case where the demon Christ restricted him to only speak in Latin, and so there were times when my grammar wasn't just right, and he would just ignore me like he didn't have to pay attention to me.
So, it's kind of like being in France. Then I heard that if you don't speak with a perfect accent there,
maybe that's it. Maybe all the demons are French.
Wouldn't surprise me, right? Makes a little bit of sense. Now, I know Bas has had a couple of actual real life physical even run-ins with spirits on the other side. Bas, have you told Father of these experiences, and what was his reaction to him if you did? Because I remember you telling me
his reaction was only you, Bas. It was because I didn't know, it was just a physical thing that happened. I remember I was able to move everything because people go right away to sleep paralysis. And when I could move everything. It was on my chest, something, and it was so wide that I couldn't feel. I couldn't go with my hands here. I threw my legs out of the bed, tried to pull myself out, but the pressure was too much. And then getting very freaking angry, that got me out of it. So I got so sick of it because it happened like 5 times, I think, 4 or 5 times. But it was very, like, even the whole house would wake up. My wife was like, again, because now I would, scream profanity at the time. And it was the only way to get out. I go, this is crazy, So then I went to the place where I saw the curtain fly, that whole story. But it was always cold, and it had this weird smell. And that's where at 3 a.m., I had no clue why I would choose 3 a.m., And that's, I just, for 45 minutes, I went to town. I said, let's make yourself physical. I mean, if you stay like that, that's easy. You're kind of a pussy, So let's make it physical. Don't bring it to my level. Let's do this. And somehow after that, it started to clear up, I guess. I don't know. It didn't happen anymore, but we also moved pretty fast after that, like within 6 months. And it was not like, it was like only twice a year, once a year, but it was very memorable because it was so scary. And then when I also came around the corner and the thick curtain hung there instead of a door, and I thought it was a person in the house. So I tricked him out a certain way, and I made a U-turn and started sprinting, and that curtain flew up against the freaking ceiling. It didn't move. It was like, whoa! So somebody ran through it. So I kept running in the house, but there was nobody in the house. And that's when it got weird. And then my daughters know exactly. She said, it's an older lady. And looking back on it, I think she was just slapping me around because the girls they knew exactly what she looked like. They could see her from the outside looking out from the inside to the outside. If they were outside, it was like they had these crazy stories. And I think that I was a heavy drinker at the time. So looking back on it, because they never had a problem, it was me. And I think that she said, hey, douchebag, even though you're a happy drunk, you're still not a good father, not a good man, not a good husband, right? So maybe that was it. I don't know. What would you think, Father?
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times that's what's happening is that the indicator is that there's something in your life that they've got an access to, and then once you cut that out, boom, they stop.
Yeah, yeah, leave the door open. That's what I always say. And even now, I have a bit one drink, so that's why I'm very closed off with drinking because immediately you feel it. So it's weird how that goes.
It might have been the doorway. I know the Father talks about a lot of times. It allows the demons in. And speaking of that, we have some questions here that I know Doug and I thought long and hard about. And they're things that, Father, I don't think you get asked about very often, maybe not in this way, I hope. But there are things hear come up a lot in the entertainment world, and people that are Catholic or Christian or spiritual, just want to live good lives. And there's a big argument, and there has been for a long time. There's been a resurgence lately of this. I think there's some kind of anniversary. The game Dungeons and Dragons. This is something that I think is hard to get a real concrete answer about. I know I played it a lot when I was very young, and I can personally attest to spiritually negative things that happen. But that's anecdotal. It doesn't convince a lot of people. Can you give us a little bit of what is potentially, if it is potentially bad, about Dungeons and Dragons? Is it innocuous? Is it just a game? Are there things there that, like for example, the Satanic Panic, so-called, in the 80s? Were these real events? Is there real satanic ritual abuse connected to this game that you're aware of? Is this something that people should avoid if they don't want to end up possessed or oppressed by demons?
I'm going to break it down into two parts because there's actually two aspects to this. The first is, we just got done talking about open doors. And so one of the aspects of Dungeons and Dragons is it's not all role-playing games are like this, but some of them are. In Dungeons and Dragons, at least from the psychologists that I've actually talked to that actually observe this. And as exorcists, we observe these things. So a lot of these things are just based on observation, is that it actually, because of the nature of the role-playing games, people become prone to what's called dissociation, which is you basically become disconnected from reality. Now, not entirely where you become insane or anything, but there's a disconnect from reality. And it's that disconnect from reality that's actually one of the open doors that we've noticed in not just Dungeons and Dragons, but other role-playing games. The second component is then once that any kind of natural disorder, even on a psychological level, can be an open door to the diabolic. So sometimes they'll get in that way. You don't see too many people becoming possessed. You do see some people becoming diabolic obsessed from playing Dungeons and Dragons and other kinds of role-playing games. Again, not all of them, but some of them. The one component in Dungeons and Dragons, and this might be something that you can actually speak to a little bit more than I can, because I've only studied certain aspects of it, and that is the fact that in the playing of it, it largely depends on how much of the occult that people integrate into the actual game itself. So if there's virtually none, then our experience is that there's practically no they don't get influence from it. Much, if at all. Once in a while, again, you'll still get the obsession because of the dissociation that's caused in psychologically. And so that's the reason why, as a general rule, we tell people just to stay away from it. And that's just because of that particular aspect of it. Again, not that many people actually become influenced if there's no occult, but there are some people, and I've read articles about this, that there are some people who are integrating very heavily actual occult, where the actual spells and stuff that are being cast in there are actually stuff they've derived from actual real rituals and things of this sort. So that's what I've heard. I don't, but that's why when we see it on our end, what we're seeing as exorcists is the fallout from it. And so we do see it. It's not that much. We don't see it that often, but once in a while we will come across somebody whose the entry point was playing a game like this. But usually there's a heavy occult component to it.
Okay, so it sounds like the option to participate in those aspects of the game being there doesn't necessarily rule it out as being something you can participate in. Like the fact that you can play as someone who engages in necromancy in this game, but you don't have to, obviously. So the idea that option's in there is not enough to say we should avoid this, as long as we're not directly engaging in that aspect of it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. And the only thing is that it also has to be one of those things that the playing of the game has to be moderated, because it's in the lack of moderation, either in the intensity of playing the game or with the frequency, that you see the dissociation really starting to occur.
Okay. The other concern and question I had about along the same lines, and then I want to kick it over to Doug for a question, is I read fantasy novels. I like a good fantasy book. I play video games still. A lot of these games are fantasy games. And along the lines of something like Dungeons and Dragons, what I find is obviously a lot of fantastical names. So names that aren't normal English-sounding names that may even use Latin or derivations of Latin-sounding words in them. And it came to me one day, I said, I wonder if there's any chance that either deliberately or because they're being influenced, some of these are names of demons. And if they are, and I am unwittingly reading these and they're entering into my subconscious, or for some reason someone's saying them out loud, like over the course of playing a role-playing game, which you're speaking to other players around the table. If they are the names of demons, first of all, is there any way we could possibly know that? 2, is it potentially dangerous for us? And 3, how could we avoid it if so?
Well, I mean, obviously the way to avoid it is just making sure that any names you're using are something that's in the context of something that's normal, I suppose. But, as far as the, here's the difficulty. If somebody is actually using the name of an actual demon and it's being used with any kind of frequency, it's like a calling card. If I keep calling your name, if I kept calling Boss's name, well, eventually Boss is going to turn and pay attention to me, right? It's the same kind of a thing here. And so you have to be very careful with that particular aspect of it is being participation in that. The second part of it is that you can become, if you voluntarily participate in something, even though you don't know all of the elements that are going into it, you can still become affected by it. This is one of the things that, because sometimes people will say, well, I didn't intend to, but your intentions don't necessarily change the reality of what's actually going on. There's an objective reality of what's occurring, and that becomes the difficulty because demons work off the objective, not the subjective. And by objective, I mean in the sense of if you're doing something objectively disordered, that's an open door and they can get their foot in the door and they can start influencing that situation independently of what you actually think. And so I tell people that, in situations like that, if you're not sure of something, and it kind of sounds weird, my basic attitude is it's better to be safe than sorry.
Right. Boss, did you ever, when you were younger, I know you had really bad asthma and everything before a lot of that cleared up. Did you ever play any role-playing games or anything when you were home as a kid? No. You avoided all that stuff?
No, I want to be a Spider-Man, if that's the thing.
Okay. Father, is there a problem with anything wrong with Bas wanting to be Spider-Man? Is that
I was in the forest, right? Because of my skin disease, I didn't have a lot of friends. So I was 3-4 hours a day. I was in the forest swinging treetop to treetop. And I think that's where my athleticism a little bit comes from. And it was a nice, easy way to escape the bullies. They would climb after me, but then once I started springing and I went to the next one, they didn't have to. They couldn't do it. One did one time, and a branch broke, and he nearly died. So after that, nobody. His head fell next to this big rock. He was very lucky to be alive. Yeah, that was scary. But,
Bas reminds me of one of those politicians where there's all these strange people dying around them.
They all hang themselves, right?
How old were you when you were doing this, Bas? When you were swinging from trees?
Oh, that was very early on. That's I think 10 started around that time.
No, were the cops after you just because you were swinging from trees, or have you done something else?
The cops were for listen.
At 10.
When I was 12, 13, I started doing the newspapers, and then I thought, since I wanted action in my life, I thought maybe it was good to break into a supermarket before I delivered the newspaper. So I would do burglaries. And so I think when I was 15, I got caught for the first time, like 90 something. And it wasn't a total 142. I got 2 times. I spent 4 days at the police station. One was at 80. It was when the first moon landing of the shuttle, space shuttle. They got me out of jail because all the cops, they liked me. They knew, why I did it because they saw my skin disease, and they kind of, put their wings around me, so to say. And they scoped me out. They say, hey, you got to see this because it's the first time when they're gonna the flicking whatever leaves from a plane. I don't know what it was anymore, but it was all the way back. Yeah. So I think it was 17 the second time.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. See, Bas needs to write a book about all his stories.
Right. He does.
It'd be about 1,000 pages thick.
Yeah.
But people would never put it down.
I'm actually doing it, and it's really insane. It's
you heard it here first, folks.
I'm thinking
it might be as long as one of your books, Father. I mean, those get up there.
Yeah, but it'd be easier to read and probably more entertaining.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I got to say, Father. I mean, Doug has a question for one of your books. I don't even know if I understand the question. Never mind the book itself. So, Doug, do you want to go ahead and ask since we brought it up, your first question is straight out of Father's book, Dominion. Can you?
Yeah, the first question, right?
Yes.
So
Sir.
first of all, Father, I do want to thank you for writing Dominion. It is a great read. Anybody who is into this subject matter, and even stuff like governance, this chapter on like structure and authority and natural law. I think anybody that's into like U.S. history and the Declaration of Independence should probably like get into that, because there's a lot of philosophical meat and things like that. But thank you for that. So the first question that I have is, you mentioned in Dominion how the disparity, quote, the disparity between what the demon's will chose and what its intellect knew to be true, essentially this divide splits a demon down the middle and causes one sin to lead to others. Would you say this is happening on a spiritually macro level to America? It seems like our elected leaders and those who put them into office know that they are acting contrary to our nation's core principles, but they choose evil anyway. And as a result, we are not united, but divided.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually true. There's a couple of thoughts along that line. I think part of it is actually the fact that we're basically, if you look at it, our country's undergoing a communist takeover. I mean, for all intents and purposes, if you look at, because they're at least in a slow kind of methodical way, and so you tend to see, and so basically that means that the founding principles are going to be attacked. So, and anytime communists come in, they basically subvert the law. They disobey the law. They don't pay any attention to the law. They get their people in place so that they can just do whatever they want without having to obey the law. So they become lawless. But then the other part of it is that they also want to destroy the national identities of specific people, of the people that they're trying to take over, because as long as there's a national identity, there's a strength that people have. And so they have to be able to undercut that and destroy that in order to be able to ultimately end up taking it over. And this is one of the reasons why they very often, one of the first places they do is they get into the educational system, because they have to start re-educating the kids away from the actual understanding that, you and I had of this country from the very beginning. So there's that element. But as far as I think there is also a spiritual warfare component to this, in the sense that you do have people. I mean, if you look at what's basically happening, you end up with this situation where basically you have it's a spiritual war at its root. I mean, yeah, there's human players. It reminds me of that line from St. Paul. It's not with flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. I mean, the very fact that they do so much stuff occultly, and I'm not necessarily saying that in the diabolic sense, but hidden. They do all this stuff hidden, and then you don't know. You can't find out all the damage they've caused until like 10 years down the road. All that kind of stuff that you actually see going on. There's also, not that I'm a fan of his, but, I sometimes wonder if what Vladimir Putin, like I said, I'm not a fan of his, but he did say, he says, well, the problem with the West is that it's run by a bunch of satanic pedophiles. Now, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist, and you don't have to be an exorcist, and you don't have to be somebody who's off his beam to actually just observe the fact that the human trafficking in our country, all the stuff that's going on, but then also the fact that, we're seeing more openly, even among some of the politicians, occult activity that you're actually seeing. I like what you just saw with the governor, was it in Wisconsin? You're seeing that stuff that's happening. So I think we're in the middle of a spiritual battle. And I think that part of the reason we're getting a little bit mopped up is, and so the dichotomy and the disparity is between our founding principles, the natural law, but then also just basic human decency on one side, and then kind of what's going on in the other. But I think that this is a spiritual battle, and I think that the fact that we're not taking a spiritual approach to it, because they're taking a spiritual approach to it, but the fact that we aren't is why we're getting mopped up, I think, to some degree.
It's very interesting to me, maybe to some of you too, but what you just said makes so much sense. They are taking the spiritual approach. Now, I don't think they'll admit it, but we see things like Gretchen Whitmer, that's her name,
right?
Clearly mocking the Catholic sacrament of Holy Communion in her
right.
video, and then but would never admit to that whatsoever. But our side, I feel like, it just wants to be like the Constitution, and they don't want to acknowledge that there's a spiritual aspect to any of it. They want to keep it just purely governmental, purely legalistic.
Right.
And that's why we're not getting that grace that would help us to overcome any of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Even the founding fathers said that if you don't have a moral people, which basically is only going to be in place when people are actually living some type of religious life of some sort, but they said if you don't have a moral people, it's over. I think it was Ben Franklin said. I know Ben Franklin said. I think Thomas Jefferson might even have said it, that without a virtuous people, this Constitution will not survive.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
where
we're seeing
in
that.
Dominion, you mentioned how people sometimes conflate power and authority, and it got me thinking about how modern career politicians have almost stripped our nation of the idea of a creator, our rights coming from a creator, and they only equate, okay, if I have power, if I have raw power, then I have the authority to do what I want to you. And for some reason, it feels that on like a national level, there's millions upon people that agree to the false premise that raw power equals authority. And to me, that I was like, how can people not see that this is part of spiritual warfare?
Yeah, at a very time in which all you hear bantered about the phrase "you're a Nazi." Well, that's exactly what they did, right? So this is, yeah, absolutely, and I think that it's just a total case of might makes right. That's their basic attitude. So, although Bas is pretty mighty, and so he's right most of the time, but they're not necessarily connected. But the point being is that. It's this attitude that you're right, that just because I have the power to do something doesn't necessarily give me the right to do it. I always use the example of, and all of us have experienced this. You're in a grocery store and some woman's kid is just a complete mongrel. She's not doing anything to keep this kid under control, and he's just causing mayhem and screaming and making a noise. Now, I have the power to take that kid and spank the living daylights out of it, right? And I would get an enormous amount of satisfaction out of doing so, but that doesn't give me the right to do it because I'm not the kid's parent. Well, it's the same thing is true in relationship to the government. Just because they have the power, and this is the real danger. That one of the reasons that. Well, first of all, I'm a big proponent of the Second Amendment, but the problem with the Second Amendment is that when it was written, it had that basically a rich man could own pretty much anything the government could own as far as firepower. That's not the case anymore. And so now you have a situation where even though we have guns and we can defend ourselves in a limited capacity in relationship with the government, in the end, if we get a tyrannical government, there's no way to get the thing out of there, given the type of firepower if the military stays on their side. But all that being said, you're right. It's a serious problem, but actually, and that's in hell. That's what it is. It's all about power in the end. Who's ever got the most powerful gets to impose his will on everybody else, and everybody has to just lump it. And they don't like it, of course, but they're not allowed to complain about it either, just like we're seeing happen in our own culture.
Yeah. Boss, how old were you when you moved to the U.S.?
36 and 35, 36. It was in 97.
Okay.
So in 97, I was invited to go to the UFC in 98. That was my first fight, I believe.
Right.
But so I came here in 97.
And just in that time, have you personally noticed that the country has had a drastic shift, a moral decline? Do you think it's a different country than it was even since then?
Oh, that's why we moved out of California, because Holland, people have no idea. They're all screaming, and this is socialism. And guys, you be careful what you wish for. Like, for instance, my neck. For instance, I'll give an example. My mother had a sciatic nerve problem, and my mother, that's the old guard. You'll never see them cry. They're tough as nails. But I saw my mother cry from the pain, and that means that she will be in insane pain. And I had a sciatic nerve one time, so now I understand what she had. So amazing. She had like a pot with OxyContins. She took 2 one time at the wedding of my daughter, and another 2. And that's it. She had 28. She never touched over the last freaking 3 years. Then they found out that they misdiagnosed her. So they made a mistake. And they realized, it's our mistake. So finally the pain that she's living with continuously could be saved. Oh, God, tomorrow. No, that's like in 2.5 months, because you're going to have to wait in line for all the other people. Wait a minute. You made the mistake. You just admitted that you made the mistake. So, but the problem, like, you see what I mean? With my nerves, if that would have happened in Holland, well, you're going to have to wait in line. No, well, nerves, they die off after 3-4 weeks. So then you're screwed, because then, now that's why your arm doesn't grow anymore. You atrophy. So that is what socialism is, and people don't understand it. That once you start paying 55% taxes, or in France, for instance, 75% taxes, you start realizing that a lot of people are misusing the system. Dutch people, but also foreigners, everybody, so everybody's doing it. And you have to work. Like, listen, if you make $2,500 at a regular job, but the government gives you $2,150 for doing nothing, you're going to go, okay, I'm going to wash some cars on the side, make an extra 500 there. Why would I go to work? And that's it. And there we are. And now suddenly you see everything going up. So, I don't know how they got it in their heads that everything is free, but it is if you don't work. So most of the time, you see the bad people there, the bad people from different countries, and because when you go to that country where they're particularly from, I was afraid. Turkey, for instance, we had some problems with Holland. But then, you go to Turkey, and I was almost afraid to go because I lived the propaganda. But then you realize the nicest freaking people on the planet. 2 days, times that I stood on the street. It happens right the day after another that I was looking for an address, and a guy told me to follow him. And I didn't want to do it because I going to have to tip him, and I didn't want to do this. He brought me all the way, and it was pretty far the first time, and he would not accept money. I was like blown away. And then the second time it happened again. As I stay in the intersection, I'm standing, another guy comes. And also, no, he didn't want to have anything. These people you realize that the people who don't want to work, those are the ones who get out of the country, and they go to the socialist countries because, hey, and my immigrant friends, hey, man, we're calling our family members. You got to come. You don't have to work here. They still give you money, So, and like I said, Dutch people also, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of Dutch people also misusing the system. But unfortunately, that is the case. And there's a fun video clip with Will Smith when he's in France, and he gets interviewed for a movie, Legend, I Am Legend, or whatever it is. And the guy, he says, oh, my God, what do you think of France? He goes, oh, my God, socialism, I love socialism. And the host goes, you love socialism? And he goes, what do you mean? He says, how much money do you make? He says, I cannot say it. He says, well, let's say you make $20 million a movie. And Will Smith goes, you can look this up. This is on YouTube. Okay, how much do I keep? And the guy goes, 4.5. And you see his whole face change. He goes, okay, maybe I don't like socialism. That's what you keep, you see? So, if you're a hardworking man and hardworking, if you want a house, it's an 11-year waiting list. No, a 13 years, sorry. An apartment is an 11-year waiting list right now. So it's tough. What is electricity? Everything is up. Also in Germany and all these countries,
Father, that ties into our friend of the show, Trevor, who runs Tridentine Brewing. He wanted to see if I would ask you. This isn't one of the written down questions, but I've heard you talk several times, and you mentioned it in our last interview also about it being, I don't know if you used the word immoral, but I'm going to use that word for lack of a better word. Immoral for the government, in other words, to tax above 10% because God only has 10%. And he was wondering if you might expound on that a little bit about what the principle is there and how concretely we can kind of use that or adhere to that.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, I use I make that statement. God only wants 10%. Where does the government get off thinking they're entitled to more than God? Just because it drives it home to people that where does the government really think this? There's two parts to this. One is that it's part of what's called distributive justice, which basically means that the government can't take money from you. So we have an obligation in legal justice to pay taxes. So when Christ said, render to Caesar's what Caesar's, the problem is now we're in a situation where Caesar wants what's not Caesar's. And by that, I mean in the sense that to take, more than 10% is essentially defrauding the labor of his wage. And I'm not talking about 10% on your income tax. I'm talking about 10% on all the tax combined. So that, you can't, because the average American is already paying probably close to, if you're in a certain tax bracket, you're in the 40 to 45% percentage you're paying already anyway. So by the time you get property tax and sales tax and every time you turn around, they're taxing. It's like Nancy Pelosi says, we're going to tax everything. Well, that's just immoral because the basic way we know this from the natural law that in justice, that if we work, we're entitled to our pay. And that is, but we also have an obligation in legal justice to give the government what is necessary, and I'm going to parse that out, what is necessary for them in relationship to do the essential things that pertain to government. But no more and no less. If the government takes any more than that, then it's essentially theft, because you're taking from the laborer a wage. You're defrauding him under the guise of tax. And part of it is they coerce you, because, basically most people, I call it bail. Most people are just paying their taxes because they want to stay out of jail.
Right.
But the point being is that when they take an excessive amount that is above and beyond what is necessary for them to run it, then they're defrauding the labor of his wage. They're taking from him what is they're not entitled to, because he has worked. He's entitled to that wage. A laborer is worth his wage, which is part of the natural law. We know that if I work, I'm entitled to the money that I should be paid in relationship to that. So when the government starts taking more and more of it, it's actually contrary to distributive justice. And so this is one of as part of the natural, and we know this intuitively, that every time we turn around, we just feel like we're getting ripped off by the government. And why is this all happening? It's because the government, and I was thinking about this one day, I said, why is it that we're paying so much in taxes? And then, of course, the real reason is because the government is involved in way too much stuff. There's way too much stuff they have no business being involved in. The government should be involved in not a single solitary entitlement program. What they should be doing is encouraging the churches and 501c3s and nonprofits to take care of that side of things. And they can encourage people to donate to those things, and also even structure the tax thing so that they would actually provide for that. That they would give tax incentives for people to do this, or give other forms of incentives for people to actually help these, so that the government doesn't have to get involved with it. And part of the reason you want, like the church or a private corporation taking care of it is because they're much more efficient with their money. The government, they take $10 billion, and the next thing maybe 500 million gets put into the actual thing. I mean, it's just all gobbled up into just waste and administration. So they're involved in way too many things. The other part of it is, and this is something that it kind of dawned on me one day, that it kind of ebbs and flows throughout the course of history. Like during the Greek time and in the Roman time, it was kind of that way, but not exactly that way. But what's happened since about the 1600s, actually since the time of the Protestant revolt, what we've seen is that the government has become way too important in the lives of people. For all intents and purposes, I should be able basically to live my life for the most part without hardly any government involvement whatsoever. The government should only be involved to the degree that is necessary to establish the common good, no more and no less. But the fact that they're in every single thing in our lives is just a sign that they've gotten into way too much. And that is an indicator of it's a violation of the natural law in relationship to the principle of subsidiarity. And so as a result of that, the government is becoming unjust by getting involved in this stuff and then taking all the taxes, which is excessive, and that is unjust. Ironically, if I remember correctly, when the Jews were paying their taxes to the Romans and they were squawking about the tax percentage, you want to know what that tax percentage was?
I probably don't want to know.
3%. They were squawking because they wanted 3%.
Yeah, I didn't want to know. I was right. Oh boy. Well, that makes that very clear, Father. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So now I just want to kind of shift gears back to a little bit of
let's
this.
back up to this little point. And that's why Bas's observations are absolutely correct.
Right.
By the time it's done, you're just paying these enormous amounts of taxes and you get nothing for it.
Or you get things you absolutely don't want for it.
Yeah, well, there's that too. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, let me maybe this will be a little bit of a lighter question. Now that we're all depressed, is there anything wrong, Father, with the traditional fairy stories? And I'm thinking of Hans Christian Andersen and these fairy tales. And the reason I ask is because it's twofold. One, I'm just curious. I like fairy tales. I like fairy stories. I like fantasy. And two, I'm a father of a 3-year-old, and she loves being read to. She loves to read, and a lot of times I'm grabbing these fairy tales, but obviously I notice fairy godmothers and use of magic and spells, and I know what the Bible says about magic and witchcraft and these kind of things. Is this enough of is it analogous enough that it doesn't matter? Is there a line there that makes this this kind of magic innocuous? It's a morality play, essentially, these fairy tales in miniature. Or is there any kind of problem there with these stories and those aspects of them?
I think in general they're okay. I think there's there's two parts of it. Some of the times that people will say, well, you shouldn't be reading any kind of fairy tales or anything like that, or any fantasy literature because it's it's false and it's not true. Well, yeah, we know that, but it's actually can play a literary value because it can teach lessons and things of this sort, and it can also be entertaining, which is legitimate as well. So there's no reason that you can't get legitimate entertainment out of these things. As far as the things like the magic and stuff like that, it just depends on it. So one of the phenomena we're seeing with more modern fantasy literature is that they're actually incorporating real occult spells, witchcraft, and things like that into it. That's where the real problem begins. And then the other part of it is if they paint witchcraft as something that's good and you want to do this type of thing, whereas in most of those things, the witch is the Wicked Witch of the West, right? You want to get away from her, or she's up to no good. She's going to eat Hans and Gretel, right? So you and so that the painting of witchcraft is bad is actually a good thing in that particular sense. So I think as long as the witchcraft is purely a literary device, which you also see that in the Lord of the Rings, that what you see Gandalf doing, it's more of a literary device. It's not something like the witchcraft that you would see in some of the other kinds of fantasy. I don't want to mention one particularly because people just go bonkers when they hear it. So, but anyway, the point is, so as long as it doesn't involve that, and as long as the witchcraft and things like this are portrayed as bad and they're just used as a literary device, I don't see what the problem is. In fact, I think they're actually pretty good for kids because it actually can teach morals and in that sense.
Well, the kind of way out for Tolkien a lot of the time that people will say is he made clear in his Legendarium and his letters that Gandalf and the wizards are essentially angels. So they're drawing on grace more than they are magic. But I didn't know if we need to be that specific about delineating those things in classic fairy tales, or if, as you said, it's okay. They're teaching good morals.
I think more like you said, the more the traditional or the classical ones, I think, are by and large. Let me put it this way: back when society was sane, if there had been a problem with these, they would have been rejected and there would have been squawking. But they didn't. Right. People saw it as legitimate at that time, and I think the only reason that you're seeing a reaction against that stuff now is because we're living in a time when things are so out of control that people have lost their equilibrium, and so they're having a hard time kind of judging the stuff, where they're very easily drawn to judging things excessively.
Bas, in Holland, have you ever had any run-ins with I know in a lot of the old world, I'm Italian, so Italy has a crazy problem with superstition and magic and all kinds of stuff. Is there any of that? Did you encounter any of that when you were growing up in Holland? Do they have witches or whatever you would call them, people that are involved in the cult? Is that part of the culture?
No, I never noticed, but I do know that the netherworld, Netherlands, because now I'm real. When I go to church there on Sunday, there's maybe 40 people in there. So I mean, confession. A priest told me that he did one confession in an entire year. One. It's in the big cities. That's Bos. Yeah.
Was that yours, Bas?
And it just took him a year, Bas, because
right. No. But no. But it's really bad. It's when you say Jesus, people start laughing. They can't talk. It's funny because they are talking with their dogs through a medium, the dogs who passed away. Whoa. And I go I said, well, you believe in Jesus? I go, wait, you said you just talked to your dog, right? Who passed away? Yeah. I said, okay, never mind.
So there is some of that.
It's over. I call them the VIs. And if they're really angry, I call them VIP. So the VI to me is the village idiot. In the village idiot, you would never start a conversation with them because they're too much gone. You can't have a conversation with them. And the louder they scream, now they become a village idiot with pride. Now they're a VIP. So I will not start a conversation with it because it doesn't matter. You can, whatever you say, they already made up their mind. It's really weird how that works.
You always have these incredible pithy sayings. You got to start making T-shirts, Bas.
Yeah,
You really do.
PI,
Those
PIP.
would sell like
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
There's a lot
those
of
would sell
crazy.
like,
Look at the world, look at the 7 deadly sins, right? All of them right now, they're at their freaking peak, right?
yeah.
Greed, envy, lust, sloth, gluttony. It's everywhere, and it doesn't stop. So, world is going crazy.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it seems like it's getting worse and worse all the time. And as Father sometimes says, we're going to get a spanking one of these days from God, and we're going to deserve it. So I think it's probably going to be pretty soon. Okay, Father, I got another one of these questions for you, and then I want to kick one over to Doug again. So this is another, again, a lot of this from my personal experience, because there are things that happen to me, and I was like, wow, I really don't have an answer, and I can't find anything, and the catechism that addresses these things, because a lot of them are like modern problems. So a book was recommended to me not that long ago by a friend, and it was by an ostensibly Catholic author, right? And I'm always a little wary when people sell me someone on that under that terminology, because then I think, well, what do you mean? He's a practicing Catholic, the work is Catholic, the theme is Catholic. But I started reading, and 2 pages in, the heroic character, the main character, is using the Lord's name in vain, the name of Jesus as an expletive.
Right.
Well, I stopped reading. Do I need to stop reading this? Does intention with these things matter? Like if it had been the villain, would it make a difference? What should our response? People that love the Lord and want to make sure that we're loving Him and respecting Him at all times, but also we don't want to break the commandments about taking His name in vain. What should my response have been in that instance? So I just continue reading it, overlook it because it's a work of fiction, or do I need to cease from imbibing that kind of stuff?
Historically, they've made a few distinctions between literature and actually things like videos and movies and things like that, or even audio things. But so let me just kind of give the background to this. Sure. There's a principle called the principle of the integral good, which basically states that a thing has to be good in all its parts, otherwise it's basically evil. So, and we know this, so for example, if somebody, if their face is all beautiful and everything, but their one eye is down like this, well, then we know that the facial structure isn't integrally good. And so as a result, they don't possess the good of beauty. It's the same thing in even our actions. So for example, I can't lie in order to achieve some good end, in order to do this, because that's the ends justify the means, which goes against the principle of the integral good. So all the things I do, when I perform an action, all the parts of it. So like my intention, what I'm doing, and the circumstances all have to be good, or at least morally neutral, in order for what I'm doing to be considered morally good. And this is actually true in relationship to even videos and things like that. So when you're talking about that in relationship to things like movies and videos, and this is something I get a little bit of heat from, but I'll tell why. I'll mention why, because there's a psychological reason why I get the heat for this. But it basically, in relationship to the movies, in the past, especially in the 1930s, there was actually a document put out by Pius XI, but there was a discussion. And basically, it was after that Hollywood had to get its act together, because the Catholic market in the United States created a sufficiently large block that if the Catholics panned a movie, it wouldn't financially make any money. Right. And so the Catholics had Hollywood over the barrel, saying that, okay, look, these are the things that you can and cannot do. And then out of that became the Hays Code, but or connected to that. But anyway, the point being is that so there's 2 kinds of actions then when you're talking about something like that's in a book or in a movie or in something like that. And it's what we call a simulated act. So you can fake killing somebody, you can fake shooting somebody, something like that. And so because it can be faked, then it just switches to, as long as it's not being portrayed in a disordered way, well, then it's not an issue. In fact, it can actually serve a good function, right? That someone gets shot in a movie, right? And so because it can actually show that justice should be served, etc. So when it comes to things that are fake, but there are certain things that are non-simulatable, or you can't fake. You can't fake nudity. You can't fake using our Lord's name in vain and things of this sort. And so there are certain things in which each time it's said. So if I knowingly start and play a movie knowing these elements are in there, then I'm responsible for the fact that this word is being pronounced, even though it's coming through a machine, but that it's getting into the created reality that God had designed, and it was never designed that way. And so if if people want to know the more serious philosophical arguments behind that, I did write a book called The Principle of the Integral Good, and this is one of the areas I actually talk about, that in point in fact, if the movie contains something that is that is non-simulatable and is sinful, then you shouldn't be watching it. However, there can be instances where it might be necessary. So, for example, somebody, we're not talking about something that's like gravely offensive to God, but if you're just talking about something that has some vulgarity or something like that, and somebody is studying it in order to be able to the artistic technique, not that they're going to replicate the vulgarities and profanities, but they're simply doing it as a technique, then that would be a sufficient reason, at least according to the moralists in the past, to study these things in order to take a look at them. With literature, it can be a slightly different kind of a matter, because it's in the reading of it, it's not pronounced. But on the other hand, if you're thinking about the word, or if it's inclining you to do the word, then normally they said that it shouldn't be done. Now, the Jesuits, of course, which we can all ask if they were Catholic or not, but the Jesuits, they used to say that it wasn't an issue. But if you actually look at some of the other manuals, they just say, hey, no, look, the movie has to be integrally good in order for you to watch it. Now, if you're watching something and you thought it was, or you didn't think it was going to be a problem, when something comes up, that's another matter. Right. Psychologically, when I say this stuff, I get panned, and the reason you get panned is because there's actually two separate goods in a movie. There's the moral good of the movie, and then there's the artistic good of the movie. Right. And the artistic good of the movie today, some of the movies artistically have reached a pinnacle where we're seeing a height where they've reached a level where it's hard to imagine them producing movies that are artistically that much better, and know precisely how to tell a story, know precisely how to elicit specific emotions and thoughts at a specific time, and they're enjoyable because they all the things are done in a proportionate, beautiful way, etc. And so what happens is psychologically people see that, they get a pleasure out of it, and then that pleasure mitigates their judgment of how bad the movie could be if it contains these other moral issues. And so that's why you tend to see people getting upset when I say, well, you really shouldn't be watching, those particular movies because of the fact that it has X, Y, and Z in it. And they just go bonkers. And now I should say, I don't get too much blowback on this particular question, except from a particular demographic, which is actually the demographic I get the most criticism from. And it's guys between 25 and 35 who are unmarried, who think they know a little bit about the Catholic faith, and usually have a problem with the Sixth Commandment. So it's that demographic is so consistent in their criticism of me, but this is one area that they really go nuts on.
Oh, that makes sense. Bas, in your acting work, when you're looking at scripts and things like that, have you had to turn down certain things or tell certain directors or producers, I can't do this unless you change this and this? Have you run across any of that stuff that's just morally you're not going to deal with?
No. Like in all voices, I did this, the movie where I played myself, with Mark Kerr, with The Rock and Emily Blunt. And also, I just... it says I just replaced the profanity with different words like freaking instead of effing. I just did that. So, but I made sure it wasn't it. Although I did it at the time in a lot. Right. Because I thought about the way to speak here. And it's an insecurity also, right? You try if you start messing up, you just throw in a bunch of F-bombs. And once I start realizing that, I go, that's where I brought the rubber band. That thing that helps with everything. That's how I started writing. And literally within weeks, it's like 90% less because you're hurting yourself every time you do it.
Yeah, one of the mutual friends.
Now I use it for if I have a bad thought, I'm already snapping it. That's a
great idea. One of the friends the mutual friends of Bas and I have, he made the observation because he actually does a lot of stand up, and he said that if you have to resort to using vulgarity and profanities, it's an indicator you don't even have any material to begin with.
Yeah. Yep. It is. A friend of mine said, why did you stop? Why don't you do it anymore? I say, why? Answer me the question, why would you? I say, if you feel that you cannot be hurt without throwing in an F-bomb, again, that's pretty sad if you think about it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
oh, I'm not hurt. Well,
And actually, it's a sign of a lack of intelligence. I mean, the fact that you can just put that aside and actually present something in such a manner that you don't have to resort to that kind of a thing is more intelligent, frankly.
yep.
It's so hard to avoid these days too. Every bit of media, and if you go online for 5 minutes, there's 1,400 F-bombs in the first time you're scrolling through the page. But
Well, you know,
Bas,
there are
probably,
a lot of the movies that are not intricately good, though. You can actually watch through things like VidAngel and stuff like that because it'll screen
Right.
it on the fly.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I'll sometimes recommend. Well, if you want to watch them, like for example, the movie Equalizers. I love the Equalizer movies.
oh, the Denzel
But
Washington.
there's so much stuff in there. I had to watch them all through VidAngel.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Yeah, those are good.
Denzel's the
Those
man,
are-
man. I love him.
Yeah, that's good
Yeah,
stuff.
he
I
could be
like
the
those
goat.
too. That's like those are like kind of the new version of the Bourne movies, except with Denzel. So you're getting that's the Denzel
Yeah.
Washington movies, right? Yeah, those are great.
Yeah.
You know what? I want Doug. I would love it if could you ask you a question about AI at this point because it also leads into something else I want to ask Father. So, do you have that one ready?
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely dovetails nicely with keeping custody of your eyes and keeping custody of your ears and
Yes.
what you put into your mind and things like that. So the second question that I had for you, Father, was about AI, which also relates probably to that age group of guys you were talking about in the Sixth Commandment. So it was, do you foresee artificial intelligence causing an explosion in sinful curiosity, given its ability, like the demonic, to introduce manipulated images into a man's imagination that he had previously never considered? It seems that AI's ability to venture into hyper bizarre, freakish, and strange imagery would be exploited by the demonic. And so I guess Bas could correct me if I'm wrong, but my sort of analogy is I hear a lot of MMA fighters say it's like it's not the punch that I saw that took me out, it's the punch that I didn't see coming that took me out. And to me, sinful curiosity, it's like if I see a woman and she's scantily clad or whatever, I could avoid that immediately. I know it's wrong. I could be like, boop, nope, block that person, mute that person. But with sinful curiosity, it's like it gets you going down this dark road where you think, oh, it's okay. It's okay. And then it's the sin that you didn't see coming that just slaps you in the side of the head or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, artificial intelligence. I don't know if you guys listened to that podcast I did with the guys interviewing me, and I just basically said, well, look, in and of itself, artificial intelligence is actually controlled by three things: the instruction code in the actual CPU that's used, the programming that's actually used, and then the data that it's fed. Right. All those three things determine what it's going to do and what it's not going to do. And so in and of itself, AI is actually a phenomenally good tool. The problem is, though, is it's like any good thing. And the more powerful it's like the internet. Internet is a phenomenally good thing. But anywhere from 35 to 50% of what goes through the internet at any one given time statistically is pornography. So I think with AI, what you're going to see is people are going to use it more and more for evil, even though it'll still be being used for good and things like that, just like the internet is. But I think you're right. I think you're going to see people going down that dark path, creating forms of pornography because AI can actually generate videos now, and you can put anybody's face on anybody's body type of thing. And so I think you're going to start seeing more and more of that stuff actually happening. Will it start creating stuff that we had never thought of before? Yes, provided that it's in some way in the data that's fed it. So, but it could be something that's latently there. And so I do think that you're going to start seeing a proliferation of that. In fact, I suspect that the guys generating pornography are like anything else. You're going to see them slowly get involved, but once they get involved, someone's going to drop a boatload of money into it to really start producing stuff that is really alluring and stuff that is very addictive to people.
Yeah, it's. I think part of the appeal is, oh, I wonder what I can do. What can I get this to generate? Let's see the limits of this thing, and then at some point, the moral filter goes out the window because, you're so busy thinking about, as the old saying goes, what you can do. You don't worry about if you should do. I had another question about, this is also about the world of the internet, which is kind of its own world these days. So Father, you probably are aware that streaming services and digital media have really taken off. We're talking about movies, TV shows, video games, even books. A lot of them are offered often at a discount or for convenience's sake in digital formats. And what we've seen happening, though, is people are buying these things. They're buying movies, they're buying TV series, they're buying books and games in digital formats for the convenience's sake. It's all stored on the cloud or on Amazon servers, or in the case of video games, Sony servers, things like that. And if at some point what's been happening is a lot of these, in the case of the movies, some of them are getting censored, revised, or they're getting taken down from the service completely. Same thing with the video games. They're being rendered unplayable or being removed from people's digital libraries. And no one's being refunded for this happening. So you pay often the same, if not more money than you would for the physical item, just for the sake of the convenience that digital offers you. And one day you decide you want to boot up this game, you want to boot up this movie, it's gone. There's a kind of saying has developed on the internet and become very, very popular in certain circles, which says, if buying isn't owning, then piracy isn't stealing. And so they're saying, if we're going to pay for these things from these big corporations, these big producers and publishers, and it's a tenuous ownership, then we might as well just download them directly without paying, pirate them, and feel morally justified in doing so. Does that viewpoint hold any water morally?
I think that the biggest mistake that people make is that you don't own anything when you like buy a digital thing. If you actually read the licensing agreement, it just lets you watch the thing. And in the licensing agreement, it will even say they can pull it at any time and you're just out. And so what's happening is you're entering into a contract with people, and the contract's bad for you. I mean, really, it's the corporations that are designing it in such a way that the contract entirely favors them, that they own everything, you own nothing. Even in software, the software that runs your computer, you don't, technically speaking, own it. You only actually have a license agreement to make use of it. And so I think the first thing that people need to do is to realize what you're getting involved in. You're not getting involved in any kind of an ownership kind of a situation. And if you feel robbed because they took the thing down, well, then the moral to that story is don't get sucked into a bad licensing agreement. Now, that all being said, can one pirate stuff? And I think that there are some times in which the pirating, I think, would be legitimate, but there's a strict set of moral principles that govern it. And this would be, for example, let's say for the sake of argument, some author puts something up on YouTube, and this was so important for people's education, and it was something in which that it would definitely have a very good impact on the good of society, and it's necessary that the citizens know this and that type of thing. And then YouTube takes it down, right? And the author, and they might even block the author from re-uploading it or what have you. If he can't put it on another platform, which a lot of authors do, like most of my stuff, I'm on like 4 or 5 different platforms, because it's just a matter of time with the stuff I've said. Just the stuff I've said about homosexuality, I'm shocked it hasn't been pulled from YouTube yet, but or my whole channel taken down. But that being said, some of those things, I'm thinking of a movie, although Ben Still would probably go bonkers if he found out I said this, but the movie Money Masters, I think even though there's a few inaccuracies in it, it is such an important thing for people to be able to watch and to hear. And so if that was, for example, if that was ever just taken down from the internet, then I think that's one of those things that, because of the necessity for the common good of the society, that it could legitimately be pirated for people to watch for the sake of their own education. But it's a very narrow window of things. And I'm basing that, by the way, on what moralists have been saying for about the last 100 years, ever since copyright became a big thing. They talk about the copyright is a contract. So when you're buying something that's copy protected, you're actually entering into a contract and you're bound by the contract. And so that's what they would actually end up saying about it. part of that is that there's two things you want to avoid is saying that you could never do it. But on the other hand, you don't want to say, well, you can do it whenever you think that you're getting ripped off, because then people will just be pirating all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess for a follow-up question to that is there any distinction? Is there any difference between the fact that something being a physical good, I go to the store and the bookstore and I buy Dominion, I have a physical copy of your book in my hand. But a lot of these companies, they're producing work that people are, involved in the effort of bringing to fruition, and those people are getting paid, et cetera. But then digitally, they're endlessly replicable. So they're not doing anything really. There's no work being put in to rake in profits in perpetuity for these things and not give people a good. Does that make any kind of difference in the distinction if people are then saying, well, past a certain point or whatever it is, something is certain years old or whatever, that it's okay for them to avail themselves of the digital version of it because they feel like it's not an actual good, something that was produced with someone's labor?
Yeah, I mean, there is some labor that's produced. Obviously, you're right; it's disproportionate to the amount of replication and sometimes the amount of money people make off this stuff, right? I mean, if you think about how much energy went into making Twitter and the fact that it's a $40 billion corporation now is just nutty, right? By the way, I like Musk, the fact that he bought the thing. That's not the issue. But that all being said, there's the moral to the story is I should say this. I'll just tell you what the moralists have said, and then you can kind of analyze it for yourself. The moralists have always said that in relationship to things like copy protection and even things like this that are replicatable, etc., that it's ultimately based upon what the government sets as the parameters and guidelines for its legal use becomes morally binding. So if the government says after 75 years, which by the way, it used to only be 25 years, and then the author had an opportunity to renew it for another 25, but it actually, it was Disney that convinced Congress to move it to the life of the author in 75 years. And that was because of the fact that they had a bunch of movies that were coming up that they were still making a boatload of money off of that were coming up to lapse on the copyright. But that all being said, so they basically say what governs it is, again, because you're entering into a contract, you're entering into a situation that's basically regulated by the government. The problem, I think, though, is, so I just wanted to establish that as a principle, it's what the governmental laws establish becomes what's morally binding. Now, the problem, though, is that obviously the government I don't think knows what it's doing in this area.
No.
And I think it's one of those things that, and I'm not sure what the solutions are either. So because of the fact that, copyrights, patent laws, all these things, something needs to be addressed in relationship to it. Ironically, copyright and patents are purely a modern invention, because even up through the Middle Ages, if you invented something, it was considered, once you discovered it and invented it, that was considered the general intellectual patrimony of humanity now. And so anybody could take your idea and go do it themselves, right? But the only reason a lot of times people would make money off their ideas is because they were the only ones who knew how to do it, or they did it the best. And so, and that's how but it wasn't until later that the whole idea of copyright and all this other stuff kind of came up, that you started to see this particular problem. And so there are some moralists who are calling into question the very idea of intellectual property. And their arguments, I think there's something to them. I'm not fully convinced, but there's a cogency that I think does need to be parsed out and addressed in relationship to that. On the other hand, that's how I financially survive, but there it is.
You don't have a horse in this race, huh? Bas, I'm sure you know very well, and we hear it all the time as MMA fans, that Dana White, president of the UFC, is constantly going after these streaming services that are illegally streaming UFC events, pay-per-views that are giving people backdoors to watch these things without paying, whatever their reasoning might be for doing so. was this a problem? I don't think it was a problem yet when you were still fighting, probably. But is it a problem now with karate combat that you're aware of? Are people illegally streaming the karate combat events? Because it's free online anyway, right? So they're not.
It's free online. Yeah, they don't really care. But the reason, listen, I used to do it as well. I had a black box when I came to America. So,
Okay.
When I came out with my workouts and my DVDs, I have a DVD set that I sell 7 DVDs for $149, and I went to a website and they had over 4,500 downloads there. It was illegal, and that's when that's when I stopped everything. That even CDs making copies from artists. That's when I realized, oh shit, yeah, because it's never personal, and right. Until it becomes personal, you know what it feels like, and then the excuse is, oh, they have money enough. Like for instance, here I'm here. With a group of friends, and they have these sticks now, these fire sticks, and apparently you can watch everything on that. They're 75 bucks. It's just one time you pay, and I can watch UFC, anything I can watch on it. And they say you should get one. So I will not buy that, of course. You see, so that's but I have to be honest. If I wouldn't have gone back to the church, I probably would have gotten it. You see what I mean? I just have my principles now in order, and I just don't want to break them. So, yeah.
Even then, even being, a Catholic, a Christian, someone with a moral compass, I feel like these areas, this is why I'm so glad to have you both on. It's so tricky because you can make all kinds of justifications for it. We hear all the time about how terrible the music industry is to the artists, right? And they're not getting the money anyway. So why don't you just download the album because it's not going to hurt? There's all these nuanced or supposedly nuanced reasons for why you can do this stuff.
But Chris, one of the things that people have to avoid is just because they're acting bad on their side of the equation doesn't mean you can act bad on your side of the equation. Right. And I think that's the thing that people have to kind of keep in mind is that just because they're acting badly, and like I said, I think there's a lot of bad laws and this whole thing is structured badly, etc. Doesn't mean necessarily though that therefore you can do what you want.
Yeah, I try to keep in mind, like, even if I'm not hurting them, I'm hurting myself when I sin and I do something wrong. Guys, do we have time for 2 more questions? Or
Sure.
Okay, great. Let me do this one real quick because this one's a real hot button issue, and then I want to get one more from Douglas if we can. So I'm going to read this one a little bit because I want to make sure I get all the points right. So there's been a tremendous rise among video game publishers. This is largely in the West these days. I know video games isn't necessarily you guys' area, but I feel like we can extrapolate a lot from this. So there's been this real move in video game development in the West, especially for what's become known as the uglification of women. So this is a move to make when you see women characters in video games these days, they're very masculine looking, they have wide jaws, they're heavily muscled. In other words, they're trying to make them as unisex appearing as possible. And one of the other things that's become normal, unfortunately, is it used to be when you would create your character in a video game, you would choose, it would say, do you want to be a male character or a female character? Well, Bas, father, that's gone. Now what you have is body type A, it says, or body type B. So they're removing sex from the video games. They're not even giving you the option to say that you want to play as a male or a female. You're selecting a body type, and this, often amorphous blob. You can either imagine that it looks a little more feminine or it looks a little more masculine. But at the same time, I really want you to take on both of these things. The pushback from the so-called right, the right wing, has been, well, we're going to push for hypersexualization then of women. We want, enhanced proportions. We want the skimpiest outfits possible. And if any of that stuff is censored in the least before the game is released, we're going to boycott. There was a game recently with a very attractive female main character. It was made in Korea. And a couple of the outfits that were supposed to be available for this character were censored before release. They were a little too skimpy. People on the right went crazy. They boycotted the game until these very skimpy, revealing outfits were revealed. So what I want to know is on the side of the left, this move away from sex specification in these games, the uglification, the masculization of women, is this part of the same kind of spirit that is pushing for the transgender stuff and the removal of women from society and the popular culture, something that allows men to participate in women's sports? And on the other side, what do we make of this extreme and I would say disordered reaction from the right? And if I say that and claim to be someone that's right-leaning, I'm going to get a lot of pushback because I'm supposed to be on that side, but I feel like I'm not on either side. What's the correct moral position here, Father?
Well, first of all, to answer your question, yeah, I think it is actually the same kind of a spirit, so to speak. I think it's diabolic, frankly.
Yes.
The fact that you have this. I mean, it's not even human, frankly. Human beings, if they just function normally and have any use of reason whatsoever, no, this is a guy and this is a girl, and they have a general idea of this is what women do and act and like and look like and what their physical makeup is, and this is what guys are. And so the fact that you're seeing this to get to such a degree, this is stuff that not even, I mean, you sometimes wonder what kind of a human being comes up with some of these ideas when it comes to like the transgender. Like the first time I ever read the fact that there were 57 genders, I suppose now there's like 100 and something. But the first time I read that, I'm like, who comes up with this kind of stuff? And I started reading. I didn't even know what half these terms mean. I had to look them up. I'm like, this is just silly, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. All that being said, so I do think it's kind of a spiritual. I think it's a spiritual thing more than it is anything else, because demons actually hate gender, specifically the female gender. And on the side, because of the fact that it's like Our Lady, and they have a particularly distaste and hatred for men because they're in the image of God the Father. Mm-hmm. So they're the ones that are pushing the people. Now, I'm not suggesting that people. No, I think some people in the occult are this way, and I think that there's some of them that are pushing it. But you don't have to be in the occult for demons to make use of you if you're a useful idiot. That kind of a thing. But that all being said, as far as the morality actually of it is you're actually right. We shouldn't be on one side or the other. That the fact that they don't have clear gender delineation is itself contrary to the natural law, and we should just ignore it. And it's contrary to right reason. So we should not be on that side of the equation. On the other hand, there is a thing called modesty, the virtue of modesty, and we have to adhere to those principles as well. And so we can't. We can't. The other thing is that one of the signs that people have started to lose their rational control in relationship to their appetites is that things start to become exaggerated. So you see, so for example, the guy who's, starts getting into porn, then if he's going to draw something, he's going to draw women with oversized body features and things of this sort. And this is an indicator that that there has been a collapse or a drop in the control over their appetites, moderation of their appetites. And so basically there should be modesty and also just basic decorum on that other side as well. So I think that ironically too, I sometimes wonder, and maybe this is something you can even speak to, but I sometimes wonder if when they set up when they got a left that's doing all this really weird stuff, and then it's almost like the right is set up by the same people.
Yeah, it does seem like that.
This opposing view, and what the truth is, or where the mean is, or where the virtue lies, is the part that's never represented.
I think that's exactly right, because that's all we see. You want to feel like you are represented in some way, and so I think a lot of people's inclination is to go for these people that are ostensibly on their side, even if they're pushing stuff that's just as immoral as what the other side is pushing, because they're claiming to be the right side. And it makes me, it's very frustrating to me, because if I call that side out, well, that's supposed to be my team, and then I'm a bad guy. Somehow then I'm like, if I say I'm against a lot of the new positions that Trump has adopted, right? Well, now all of a sudden I want to vote for Kamala. Well, no, I didn't say that. I just said,
yeah, exactly.
Maybe we hold Trump a little bit accountable for these changes.
It's the same situation we have in the various wars that are going on, right?
Yeah. Yes.
If you're not for this side, well, then you're for that. No, I'm not saying I'm not for either side, frankly.
Me neither. Exactly. It's a very, it's a depressing position, because it really makes you take stock of the state of the world and see that there are not really any great options going on politically and culturally right now. But as long as we're just trying to stay the course and do what we know is morally right, and that's all we can do, and pray every day, and that's it. Bas, you probably didn't play many video games, right? But did your kids play any games? Were they gamers at all? Or have you encountered any of this wacky stuff that's going on, and that you avoid a lot of this. Huh? That's
I
good.
played Tetris. That's what I did. The virtual play. That's it. And the pong,
Not a lot.
ping, ping, pong, pong. You know that all the way
Yeah.
back. But never been in some in the halls. I would like to play it in Japan. You know, Virtual Fighter. That was cool, big screens, 80-inch screens, and people go like, 80 inches is nothing. Yeah, that was in '94. So it was gigantic there. You know, they didn't have that in America and Holland. So that was fun.
You probably get in trouble right now just for saying you played Tetris because that's Russian, right? And we're not supposed to like one. Yeah.
It was great for organizing.
Yeah, I love Tetris. That was my favorite. Yeah, I love it. Okay, we got so one more question, Doug. Your final question that you had there. If you can go ahead and ask that, and because we really appreciate Boston.
Yeah, I'll make it real quick. I know our guests here have a lot of going on. So this ties into nobody really having a monopoly on spiritual corruption. We know the FBI targeted Catholic churches now, specifically men who have an affinity and a fidelity for the Holy Rosary. Such an action must indicate a certain percentage of demonic influence at the highest echelons of the federal government, correct? And if so, are you, Father, able to take an educated guess, if it's prudent to do so, to disclose what percentage of Congress has spiritually ceded its faculties to Satan and the evil spirits beneath him?
I mentioned a little bit before in the podcast, one of the things that people have to be aware of is the fact that demons don't necessarily have to possess or even obsess people if they're already a mess. In other words, if you're very prone to histrionics, they know all they have to do is press a little button, beep, and then you're just going to go bonkers. And so they don't have to spend a lot of time and energy, and they're not going to spend a lot of time and energy. Now, when it comes to people like that are in Congress and in the administrative state and things of that sort, what percentage of them are actually extraordinarily diabolically influenced? I'd have really no way of actually knowing. As far as it's hard to tell from their behavior. Some of them, it's pretty clear, but most of them, most of them, it's hard to tell what the degree of diabolic influence is because they have such a high degree of psychological compatibility with demons that I don't know that the demons have to be doing a whole lot or be that much involved for their behavior. And so I ultimately, I wouldn't really know. I just tend to think that, probably a large percentage of them, whether they're extraordinarily diabolically influenced or not, I really wouldn't know, but they are influenced, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in an extraordinary way. Demons can have just ordinary control over those people because of their proclivities and weaknesses and defects, that they can get what they want out of them without having to do a whole lot of work. But that means that the demons are still controlling, I think, a large percentage of what's going on up there, because I should say this in this sense. It's not based on what I read from or see in the mainstream news media, even though that should always be an indicator. It's actually based on stories of people that I know of that actually work back there, tell me the place is just corrupt as can be. So.
Yeah, to me, when I saw them, it's like they're targeting people that actually pray the rosary. I'm like, there must be, demonic influence going on there if we reach the point where the rosary is the bad guy or something along those lines.
Yeah, but demons are just like anybody else. So they build the psychological compatibility with people over time. And that's what they've done with these people. They've built it up over the course of time and basically convinced them that anybody who wants to say a rosary has to be evil. And how do they do that? Because those are the types of people that are going to pray outside of abortion clinic. And so they're protesting the very thing that we want to protect and all that. So they build it up slowly. And then they get to the point where they're actually, what their looks like is like, man, you'd have to be possessed to do this. No, not necessarily.
Right. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay. We do have one super chat here from Kevin. I want to make sure I get that in, a $10 super chat. Kevin just says, thank you. God bless. Thank you. God bless you, Kevin. You are our first super chat ever on the channel, so we really appreciate that. And Father Bas, thank you so much for your time for doing this. You know what, Father? I got to know.
Oh, look at that.
Before we start pushing this, Father, I got to know real quick. Are you an MMA fan now? Are you watching MMA fights, or are you just friends with Bas here? You kind of don't. deal with any of that watching of the fight stuff?
You mean are you asking me?
Yeah. Are you a fight fan? Have you been made a fight fan?
I only have really interest in it because Bas was really involved with it, and we're such good friends. But the other thing is too is that when you're friends with Bas, I just listen to his stories, and that's enough MMA I need to hear.
That's right.
A lot of craziness.
Yeah. Okay, so before we wrap up, Father, you have I don't know how many books at this point, and you're working on, is it 2 new books that you're working on now, or just one?
Yeah, there's Dominion there, which people can actually get. The other book that I just published a little while ago is called The Limits of Papal Authority Over the Liturgy,
Right.
because that's a question that's really kind of come up. And but the book I'm actually working on now is The Psychology of Masculinity and Femininity.
Oh, great.
So it's the first 2 chapters are done. There's about 14 chapters. It'll be about 1,000 pages, but it's a very technical work. A lot of brain study stuff brought into it to show that women behave a certain way and men behave a certain way, and that's just how we're designed and structured. So,
right. And you have Shop Talk also. When did Shop Talk come out?
Shop Talk came out just about a year ago.
Right.
I take that back. It's only been out for about 9 months, 9-10 months. So yeah, and Shop Talk, it's the sales on that are slowly building because it's a fun read, and a lot of people are getting it for their young men and their family just to read, because it's good stories about this is what you got to do if you're going to man up.
Right. And final thing on the promotion end for Father is I've seen, and I am going to order, as long as you give the okay, these mugs, Father. These awesome.
Yeah,
mugs.
there you go.
Those are official Father Ripperger mugs. They are.
Yes, they are. They're put out by trackflags.com. We have a licensing agreement with them to basically take my statements and put them on there. There's a couple more I've suggested. He's still working on getting a couple more that are done. But
great.
the favorite ones are "Sin Make You Stupid" and "Demons Don't Care About Your Emotions" and stuff like that.
Yeah. That's it. Those are them. Okay, great. Yeah, I want to get all of those. I was hoping to have one here already for the interview, but maybe come back again. I'll have like 4 or 5 of them in my hands.
I got him. I got him. So.
You got him, Bas?
Oh yeah, I got him for sure.
You have the big Stein, the big.
I think the 14 ounces, the 15.
Yeah.
The biggest one, yeah.
Nice. Okay, and then we got to talk about Douglas and I.
O2 trainer.
The O2 trainer. That's right. Can you give us a little?
A really fast rundown for the people who don't know. Okay, so this is how I attack. It goes really fast. So your lungs don't do anything by themselves. They're just 2 bags. If you can expand your chest, you cannot breathe. Because when you expand your chest, that creates a vacuum between your body and the lungs. And that vacuum, that will actually open your lungs. So if you think that your chest expands because you put air in it, forget about it. It's the other way around. Your chest expands, and that's how you pull the air in. Okay, boom. Number 2, how does your stamina increase? Your stamina increases when you train really hard. Yeah, well, what really happens? Okay, well, I found the answer. When you work out a muscle over and over again, it becomes more efficient at its job, and therefore it uses less oxygen. Oh, good. Okay, metaborflex is a nice word for gassing. Let's say I'll use the same example because it's the most easy to understand. You're running a freaking 40% hill, 30% hill. You're getting tired really fast. Suddenly, boom, it feels like you hit a wall. This is when you start gassing. What happens when you're gassing? What happens is that your body starts redirecting blood flow. The oxygenated blood from your legs that you are using, it sends it to the number 1 priority in the body, which are your breathing muscles, because 3 minutes without that, you're dead. Okay, wait a minute, but you just said that if you work a muscle over and over again, you give it more endurance, and therefore it uses less oxygen. Yeah, okay, so why don't I work out my, on average, 11 pounds of breathing muscles, which are your diaphragm and your intercostals, your external intercostals, the muscles in between the ribs. And that's what an O2 trainer is. I didn't invent it. I invented the way it works. And since I was 14 years of age, it's such a simplicity movement. It works so perfect. I actually have the patent. People were attacking me from the other products that have resistance in and out, which I knew that doesn't work. And now suddenly they want to do business with me because, well, I have the patent, like I said. So it's life-changing. Give it 6 weeks. It takes literally not even 4.5 minutes a day. That's the only thing you need to do. There's 2 exercises. You train your front breathing muscles. The next day you train your back breathing muscles. It will give your whole chest, your circumferential, you got 360 degrees, breathing muscles around your body. It will make the chest expansion the most. The reason I got it got big is because I went to a breathing expert, Dr. Bas Rutten, and the first thing she did was at Fifth Avenue in New York, measure my chest expansion. She says, exhale, inhale. She goes, okay, yeah, that's not possible. She started laughing. She does it again. She says, wait, runs out, comes back with another doctor. So I go, okay, it's either really good or really bad. She says, you're not going to believe it. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, normally if they break the chest expansion record, it's by 1/8 of an inch. You almost went 2 inches further than everybody else. How is that possible? And I pulled the auto trainer out and say, I'm using this thing. She started using it, put it in a book, and now boom, 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 boom. And then the published medical journals, the scientist from Usain Bolt told me to do the breathing exercises because even Usain Bolt is doing inspiratory muscle training. So every endurance athlete in the Olympics will do inspiratory muscle training. So it's very important, very good for your body, especially after the age of 28, because that's when your chest starts calcifying. That means I'm 59. If I wouldn't have done any breath work, I would have lost already 1 liter of the 6 liters that I have of lungs. Wow. That's how fast it goes. So keep it up. And
very happy with the OT training.
Yeah, Douglas said it's 6 weeks.
Don't expect the result in a week. Do it 6 weeks, and then people go like, "Whoa, you're not going to stop it." I'm doing it for 6 or 7 years now, every day, and I post those videos as well on the special website. So people, well, time lapses because nobody wants to see me breathe for 5 minutes, right? So,
you don't want to know about it if they do. You don't want to hear.
Yeah, but I just still keep them in check so they know I do it. So hopefully that inspires them to do it as well. And yeah, I like it.
And it's available in a lovely blue and also in a green. So if you're a
fall,
or if you're an autumn, there's a color for you. If you're a summer, there's a color for you. And Bas, are you really writing a book right now?
Yes, I started. It's a lot. I'm writing also a really cool story, which has a lot of Catholicism in it. It's really cool, not violent. Okay. But it's a fine line of balancing, and people are gonna go like, "Whoa, that's okay," and yes, that's gonna be okay because I will let it be checked by Father. Read it. There's some really funny stories in there. There's really, it's pretty cool.
Do you have a timeline?
My fee boss will be an O2 trainer, which you were supposed to send me like 4 years ago.
Oh, I probably did. You probably didn't see it. You're gonna get it. Oh, gee.
Well, actually, no. I think if I remember right, when we were talking about it, we were holding out for the ones that were adjustable.
Oh, yeah. That's an upcoming new thing. So it's going to be cool.
Oh, there's a new model coming out. Okay, great.
Yeah. But we're busy with that for a while. It's on its way. The prototype I have already. So.
Okay. Well, whenever some of these new items release from either one of you, maybe we'll have you all back on. This was a blast, Father, Bas, Doug. This was so much fun and very informative. Thank you so much. And Father, maybe for any of our Catholic audience members, would you mind giving us a blessing before we end this?
Sure. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti super vos et manet semper. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much again, Father, Bas, Douglas. We will reconvene at some point, hopefully all of us together. And in the meantime, if you are watching this after the live stream, please share, please like, please subscribe. We're here every Monday, 9 o'clock live, and the replays are available immediately after. God bless you all. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Godspeed.